Welcome to the Pastel Society of America's demonstration, a layered and blended approach to soft pastel with Brian Bailey, Master Pastelist. Brian Bailey, formerly a professor at the School of Visual Arts in New York, now paints and teaches privately in New Jersey. Following a successful career that spanned several decades as a noteworthy illustrator, he began to focus his energies on more personal artistic pursuits. He has won numerous awards for his work in pastel and has been featured in select exhibitions both nationally and abroad. Most recently, his work was exhibited at the International Pastel Biennial in China, as well as several exhibitions at the Butler Museum of American Art in Youngstown, Ohio. His work is in several public and private collections, including the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. As an artist working in a realist tradition, he tries to create singular contemporary images that speak to the fragility of both the natural world and the human condition. The stillness of his paintings offer the viewer a moment of both contemplation and reflection. Please join us in welcoming Brian Bailey.
So I want to welcome you to the demo. This is for the 2024 PSA show, Enduring Brilliance. Most of you, or many of you, might know my work, but probably not from demos. I don't consider myself a demo artist, at least in the venue or the genre, rather, of still life or my veiled figures, which are more formal paintings. So I do teach classes that deal with still life on a daily basis. Meaning like we have a 3-hour class and the students can get done what they can get done. And sometimes a full painting that's fairly quick, but still shows the values, the forms, some of the details. I'm setting up an underpainting right now, which is my preferred way of working. I'm kind of blocking out my areas of shadow and light, some of the details. Again, in a short demo, I don't expect a lot in terms of a finished quality painting if it was a formal painting. So in my work on my website, if someone looked at still life work, I mean, those are tedious, painstaking paintings that I've done over a course of time. And I don't really care about that length of time unless I'm drawing something such as today, which is a tomato from the garden, and it will have its own shelf life for drawing purposes. I don't like to work most of the still life items from photos. I prefer to work from life when I can. It gives you so much more in terms of color and variance that you have to sort of comply with, which is blurring your vision and seeing values a little bit more clearly. If I was doing what I consider a drawing, and this will certainly be a drawing trying to get a fair amount of it done in a short time, I may not even get to the other tomato, but again, not being what I would call a demo artist, in this genre, I will do what I can do to sort of show you my technique with this. The same technique applies to any formal painting, whether it be a figure or a still life. It's just a matter of time. So do I have the time to sort of go back to it and play with the color and play with the shapes and build? And I tend to have a very building manner of working. Also, I'm alone today, so that you are getting hopefully some view of this that is helpful. My wife is gone. She was making too much noise, so I'm trying to do this solo. And if I'm lucky, Corey Pitkin will be editing this into some sort of reasonable demo. So this is an underpainting, as I said. I just am using predominantly this Prussian blue, which is a very dark blue. I'm using a sheet of Somerset, which is a printmaking paper, but I prefer those. I don't use any sanded papers in my work. I was self-taught with pastel. I never had instruction in it, so I kind of went about my choices based on some teaching that I had done in pastel, and not being a authority on pastel, I kind of used my own methodology to kind of figure out what's a good surface to use. I didn't know anything about pastel matte sanded papers, even the variety of papers that were out there for a long time. I just was basing everything off of some very low quality materials, and that would be newsprint. So it's a cheap material to teach students with. So I thought it was very accommodating in terms of, finances and things like that, to allow the students a little bit of freedom to make mistakes. And I think, in art, you have to have that freedom to make mistakes. So from a teaching direction, I told them just use newsprint for the time being. Now, after years and years and years, I know, newsprint is the lowest quality of paper. It's not archival. It's full of materials that yellow in the sun, and it's basically newspaper. So I still love the surface. So when I went about my own exploration of pastel, I basically went to New York Central Art Supply, which used to be a fabulous store in Manhattan in New York City, and they had a man upstairs, and I believe it was the second floor, might have been the third floor, I can't remember, but he was very knowledgeable in paper, and I asked him, what's kind of like newsprint, and he kind of laughed, knowing that newsprint is considered really bad paper, and suggested I use some Reeves BFK, which was a printmaking paper. And I just applied the same technique that I had been using on newsprint to the Reeves. And, that was all based on my experience with painting. And I had formerly been an illustrator, and I used oils and acrylic, and I didn't really use pastel until later for any illustrative work. I did some book covers and things like that with that. But my painting experience was just the way I'm painting now, which is kind of an underpainting technique. It's just building my drawing in a way. That's the way I kind of think of this. It doesn't get painterly, and you can see the grain is exposed. I'm not flooding it with pigment. All of those things are beneficial to me to build layers and to sometimes rub them. Sometimes the pastel does the rubbing for me, and sometimes I physically rub it. But as I said, this is just truly my technique. I was raised in an area where there was not a lot of art. So my knowledge of the arts stemmed from taking home as many books as the librarian would allow me that were all art-centric, whether they were even historical, times, or something about the Crusades, or some different point in history. It's the pictures that captured my imagination, and I built my knowledge of the arts through that, whether it be master drawings or master paintings, and I gravitated towards those. I copied them. I did studies of Michelangelo's figures when I was 7 years old. I thought that was somehow wonderful to me, but I was raised in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has extremely cold winters, so television was pretty crappy back in the day, unless you like 1940s musicals in black and white. And I don't think we even had a color TV until I was probably in my early teens. So the experience of television had its limitations. I was always doing something, and it was generally drawing or painting if I wasn't outside. If I was outside, then I was running through the woods. So this kind of approach of being very physical in my other life, and then being very kind of sedentary in my art life, because there's not a lot of movement. I'm not a big proponent of sort of like fast demos because frankly, they don't fit my sensibilities um, for painting and drawing. And that doesn't mean I don't like other people doing it. I love watching somebody do a fast demo and at the end you're wow. But this is a different approach and it fits for me. And that's why there's limitations on how many people would like me to do a demo for their societies or anything else, because it could be a little bit taxing on the viewer. It's not an exciting thing. And someone may understand my sensibilities if they watch, but it doesn't mean that that's an enjoyable thing for them. Like I said, me studying paintings and drawings when I was a child, kind of like gave me that slow approach to the beauty in art. And my dad, being a businessman, bought me my very first set of pastels when I was probably like 6 or 7. And I used them to a little bit here and there all the time up until I went to college, and that little set of Rembrandts went with me to college. And upon bringing it to my very first drawing and painting class, I can remember the teacher go, "Why did you bring that? Because we won't be using that ever." And he made a big point of how much he disliked pastels. So over the years, I've realized a lot of people that don't like pastels, they never really initiated themselves to it. It's a beautiful medium. It's extremely tactile. Even in my method, I still find it's tactile. I mean, someone else may look at this and say, well, this is all layering, rubbing, and noodling with it and being finicky with the medium. But that's my approach. And the results I get, I'm fairly happy with. So I would never suggest this for anyone else unless they're very patient with their arts. I don't have many ways to explain my love affair with pastel except to say, like, I painted in all mediums and, to some, satisfaction, I would say. But I like this. When I really got back to using it was thankfully through teaching, because I didn't know there was places where it was an acceptable medium. And I'm not the person who does lots of research on things before jumping in. I generally just jump in and sort of see where I land. And that's kind of what happened with pastel. So I use it as a teaching medium. As I said, I thought I could just use my sensibilities of painting and drawing to sort of use a different medium towards. And I did a few simple drawings, usually gave away as gifts. The very first one I brought to France, it was a simple peach, or a couple of peaches, and I just gave it as a gift to the people we were staying with, who seemed to like it. I think a few years later was the first year I entered the PSA with a drawing. I think the very first thing I entered was an Allied artist show in New York, not knowing that there was such a thing as a Pastel Society. I thought that would be an okay venue to start with, and I threw a drawing in. I think the very first one was rejected, and the second one got into the show, didn't win anything. And I think just after I started searching a little bit, I wasn't a big avid user of my phone, so I wasn't really searching for anything. I was teaching so much, I didn't have time to do much of my own art anyway. So, and teaching fell upon me after illustration went its merry way. So I am not a big fan of the computer. It kind of kept me from wanting to even use the computer for years, because it stripped me and robbed me of, in a way, the direction I had been going with my illustration career. So I sort of strayed kind of far from computer. I even strayed pretty far from the arts for myself for a while. Not totally. I started sculpting. So I started sculpting large wood sculptures of sort of abstracted figures for a few years and really enjoyed that. But the taxation to the body versus the interest in the final result was, not balanced. So I kind of I still do some sculptures here and there. I love that, again, using my hands in a kind of a non specific way. So those sculptures are not resolved as sketches first. I just start chiseling. It's with a chisel and mallet. I just chisel into the wood, and the wood kind of sometimes dictates to me what I'm going to do in the future with it. So I like that approach sometimes with my work. So from a demo standpoint, like I said, I'm using that Prussian blue. If I say, well, is it dark enough? And I do believe it's given me all the darks I need. But sometimes just as a slight balancer, I might sort of give a kick of black in there. You know, many times when I'm teaching, someone will be like, oh, you shouldn't use black. And I said, well, generally that could be true. And I did a lot of demos where I used no black. I've used just an ultramarine blue. And I felt that it was fine, but sometimes that extra kick, if you look at the darkest darks of pastel, and then you look at the darkest darks of a paint, whether it be acrylic or oil, they're so much deeper. And so a little bit of black, and if you look at some of the darker shades of pastels, chances are it's not derived from, you know, lapis lazuli, number one, but it's not derived from the mineral that makes blue, or it makes something else. I use blue because it's usually more on the pure side of a deep color. And I like Prussian blue if it's a warm subject, and if it's not, sometimes I use a lot of ultramarine blue, which is a cooler blue. I didn't prepare the colors because, frankly, I teach 6 days a week, and I wanted to sort of jump in and be as fresh as I would be in any 3-hour class instead of pre-planning. And I know that's not traditional to a lot of artists who do demos actively. They kind of prepare ahead, or they'll do a similar based drawing. For me, I feel like if this is going to be a true demo, I should just set something up and draw it. I wanted it to have that approach because a lot of people, for instance, if you're going out to do plein air, you don't have the luxury of just pre-planning anything. So it's good to sort of sometimes test yourself and just jump into something. The result can be not as perfect as you wanted it to be, and I expect this won't be, but I'll give it my best. So I'm going to approach some of these darks on this bigger tomato. I'm going to test as I go, meaning I'm sort of looking at some of these reds. Deep red is sometimes difficult to attain that depth, because red is a very challenging color in pastel. These pastels that I'm using are variety. There's some Sennelier here. Mostly they're probably Rembrandt. Some of those Rembrandts are 30, 40 years old that I bought. Some are Grumbacher, which is a brand that in my mind was kind of similar to the Rembrandts that I was kind of used to using. And I just been gifted some of these over time. Someone says, oh, you use that, or I've said that in a interview or demo, and someone sends me a box of old Grumbachers that they didn't want to use any longer. So one thing I like to do is get these wrappers off and break the pastel, flatten an edge, and that allows me to kind of broadcast my color a little bit more in somewhat of a more sensitive way. So I'm going to just keep applying some color, and when it starts to make sense, I like to work the shadows first. I put a little background tone just to sort of reference my color or my tones of the color that I'm choosing. And then from there, I'll just keep working it. I'm bouncing all around, but anyway, this was Somerset. It's also a printmaking paper. It's not Reeves, which I'm really fond of using in formal work. This has a little bit of a harder surface, and I've only used it a handful of times, and mostly some demos, not for any formal works. But it does allow me to, I'm just going to find the dark green as I see the colors emerging. I just kind of keep referencing that. So I bounce back and forth between using edges and flat surfaces until I'm kind of happy with that look. And like I said, if I feel the need to pick up, for instance, a stick of black and add a little pop of color, I know that the color that the way I'm using it, I'm going to layer the color on top. So the final color would never be black. It might just need a little bit extra depth. And so that's the way I'm looking at my use of color. I'm not sort of hinged on that I did this and I said this and I said that. I kind of am pretty free about the way I work, even though it wouldn't look it to the naked eye. Probably people can look at this and think it's very tedious, and it is. There's a little rubbing, right? Because I just want to keep the depth of that little aberration in the skin of the tomato, sort of how I would like to see it. Sometimes for classes, I'll do a demo, and I'll do just a small, in the corner of a page, a part of an object or something like that, just to give them reference to how I like to push the color around. And that's usually helpful to students to see that, how some artist is using the material. I think demos are important for that. That's why what you can extract out of me doing this demo, maybe it gives you some ideas for your own work. I would never, as I said, expect or want even for someone to work the way I do. It is tedious, and I have little concern with time, it's not like I sell paintings every week, and so I have deadlines to meet anymore. I used to do illustration and had deadlines, and in those cases I had to beat myself up pretty hard sometimes to accommodate the whims of a client, because if you're working on a Time magazine cover, which I had done several, time waits for no one. They expect it's done at whatever cost, and that cost was my health at times. So I sometimes did stints of every day. They would give me a job on a Monday, and they would tell me, come in with sketches the following day, and then they would say, you have till Friday at about 11 p.m. to bring it in. And they would be there. The art directors were at the Time Life building till 11 p.m. to get it to the printer. And I had to accommodate those things. And sometimes, if you paint every day, 13, 14 hours, and then you bring in the finish at 11 p.m. I sometimes did stretches of 38 hours where I did nonstop. I didn't stop except to use the restroom, and barely ate just to get the painting finished. It's not a healthy lifestyle. So, but it was my lifestyle for many years until, as I said, the job of an illustrator vastly changed. So I look at it with some bittersweet memories. So I'm just building color. I don't like to, in this case, though it is not just simply a red tomato, it has all the color variations of greens and oranges and some reds. I still have to build the depth of the reds in areas. So that's why I'm starting in these darker areas. I know when to back off from my darker shades when I see the result of what's, on the actual tomato. So if it's going into the light, I have to be cautious of things like the blue. There's the purity of color. That means in something like this, a tomato that's, in most of its surface is vibrant and sort of translucent in nature. I mean, it's kind of like a tomato is kind of like human skin. It has translucence, and you can kind of see through it a bit. So I think that aspect of it, I thought would be good fodder for a demo. We'll see how far I get. like I said, I have done a couple of demos at IAPS in Albuquerque at the conventions. And I've done some for a few other associations, societies. My very first demo was at the National Arts Club for the PSA. It was, I think, the first year I had entered, and I had won some relatively nice prize for the very first painting I entered. So that was not expected, and it was very welcomed and exciting, you know. So I found that place to be a home for many years in terms of my work. As I said, since I didn't prepare, you'll see me turn away and look for some colors. I'm not an organized artist, as some people are. I kind of grab a lot of things, and as I grab them, I kind of put them down and say, I don't like that color. And as I work the drawing, I make hopefully better choices as I go along. In this case, I have a studio upstairs. This is my teaching studio, private teaching. And so I don't really have it set up in a way for my pastel work. My upstairs studio, which is quite cramped and small, is a little bit different in terms of its the way I set things up. It's boxes and boxes and boxes filled with various colors. If I show you this, you'll say, oh, he's pretty organized. But that's really not an accurate portrayal of the way I work. So I find that in my paintings, formal paintings, that I tend to work with a handful of colors, and I don't stray from that too much. Once I've found the palette I'm looking for, I kind of stick with it throughout the painting and then make final adjustments as I go. These printmaking papers, I could erase like a little section, but anything like this that are softer papers, you don't want to abrade the paper. So sometimes I'll roll this into a cylinder, hopefully with clean hands, and then you can roll over whatever surfaces you want to sort of get rid of marks. But, this is a different way of working for many of you. And the only thing I would mention on printmaking paper like this is there is surface problems that can occur. That means that, and like I said, I haven't tried this paper in probably, 3 or 4 years as a surface for anything finished, and even in a demo, to finish a demo. So I think the last time I did it for my students. It was during COVID, and I used what I had, since going to an art store was of its limitations back then as well. I kind of started to use what I had in my inventory on one of those pieces with a piece of Somerset I had bought years before, which I liked it. It's got some very good qualities to it. Like I said, it's a little bit smoother or harder, if that makes sense to some of you, in terms of its paper feel and how it grabs. And it certainly, does have grab. Like a lot of people have asked me after IAPS, like, well, what do you use? And I explain I use this, and then I get some not really friendly emails regarding them having purchased it, not at my request, of their own interest, and then have said, I don't know how you can make this thing work. It's terrible, and they dislike it intensely. Reeves can get furry if you're not careful with it. Reeves can also absorb all the pigments. That's the thing that I like about it. It's absorbing. So you may look at this right now as a drawing and say, well, this is very maybe it's dull to your eye. I don't know yet, because it's not finished. And until it is finished, it probably will look kind of dull. That's the only word I can think of. Anyway, I don't advise using this unless you're going to take just a patient approach and sort of figure out what it can do instead of what it can't. So, that's maybe an odd way to phrase it, but I'll give you an example. I did a large painting, and it was just about finished, and it was for a show overseas, and I wanted to get it in the show. I was working feverishly on it, so even from the get-go, when I started the drawing, I did not do what I would normally do, which is exhaustive sketches for a formal painting. I do color sketches, and I do drawings, and I adjust parts of the drawing. I don't like to just say, oh, I did this from one picture of reference, or sometimes in those veiled figures, there's no way I can hire a model for 6 to 8 weeks. So they come every day. So I have to use some photographic references as well. And sometimes I do color sketches with the model here, and things like that helps lend itself a little better for my abilities. So anyway, I did this painting, and I didn't really have time to do the sketches that I love to do. So I just went right into it. And sometimes on larger works, I try to mask off with glassine or tracing paper sections of the drawing, just so that the minimal dust, I mean, it's not a lot of dust, but it's minimal dust, comes off of the painting, and it can kind of like pollute the other areas of the painting if you're working sort of area to area. And that's the way I prefer to work too, is area to area. I don't like to just bounce all around and do the lights and the darks at the same time. It's just my methodology. It's not necessarily in the handbooks of painting and drawing. It's just the way I like to work. So I didn't do the preliminary sketches, and I was using Reeves. I did a large fruit that was an open grapefruit that was translucent and really beautiful, I felt like. So I really wanted to incorporate that into the painting, and I thought, wow, it's got the beauty of the, this may sound odd, but the beauty of the figure was in there. Some of just the organic quality of the shapes, the beauty of the form, and also the translucence, I felt like was just really a special aspect of that fruit that I wanted to capture. It's beautiful. So I did the painting of the figure, and I had it all laid out, and that was pretty much completed in most cases. For my taste. And then I decided, okay, now I'm going to do this still life and really make it beautiful on there. And I jumped into the still life and finished it up in a couple days of, long days working on it. And when I lifted off the protective glassine, I noticed how terrible my painting looked, because it was not sort of thought out. It was just plunked in there, and the colors were fighting each other tremendously. So, to the great respect I have for Reeves as a paper, which it is handmade, and it's soft but strong, if that also makes sense. I was able to lift off all of the finished grapefruit away from the figure, and that allowed me to sort of like put in anything I wanted, which was, it was only a halo, like a ghost image of the grapefruit left when I was done. So that really saved the painting. And so ever since then, I've been a big proponent of that paper, because you could do a lot of work on it, and then if you didn't like it, you could remove it. Now, I don't prefer to work that way either. I don't like to do work just to remove it. I don't think anybody does. But it did save the painting, and I was able to submit it to an exhibition, and it was well received. So that's my story about Reeves BFK and why I kind of use it. It has a texture of newsprint, not necessarily a plus to anybody in the audience, but for me it was. It also allowed me to make corrections if I ever had to, because I tend to plan things so meticulously that I tend not to have a lot of corrections in my work. I kind of just let it be, you know, whatever it looks like is what it looks like, and that's the plan. So I'm just picking up a variety of colors. I'm in the shadow. I want to stay in the shadow for a bit. In a perfect situation, I would have been able to set this up, pick my colors, and sort of be a little bit faster instead of the time it takes to look at things, look for things rather. So in essence, kind of, you know, you're seeing this truly live, but without any ability to sort of make choices here on a piece of paper that I would sort of test my colors, and just seeing it right on the surface. It's not the way I would work upstairs on a formal painting, but it, you know, in a demo, you know, I'm not, as I said, professional in the way of doing demos where people are pre-planned, and I didn't want to make that the situation. I wanted to sort of show you how I would approach a demo, because I think that's important, that you see different artists and how they work. Regardless of the finish of this, I didn't want to falsify my methods and show you something that's amazing, and then you say, well, how long did it actually take? I'd rather you see it live, then you can determine if this is anything you want to extract from my methods. Maybe it isn't. That's fine. Like I said, if you're somewhat self-taught, there's not a heck of a lot that I take from others, because I didn't have that background with this. And so someone might say, well, you should educate yourself better, but I like the way I work because it feels real, because I built upon, like I said, just my knowledge of pastel and my knowledge of what's important to me artistically. So I didn't want to, I don't mean to make it sound like a bad word to say pollute, but I didn't want to have my work affected by others as much as humanly possible. And I know in a world filled with media, bombardment of media, that's sometimes difficult, but that's what was my thought process about this. Don't let others get in the way of your own directions, you know? And like I said, I don't expect everyone to love my work or to hate my work. You know, it's like, it's mine, you know, and that's important to me. And that's what I think every artist should strive for, is just their own directions, if possible. Years ago, I remember coming out of college, and I had some ideas for paintings that I really wanted to go after. And I got out and I saw some artists working, or his works rather, and they were beautiful. And they were also in the same direction that I had planned on doing. And I had done some sketches and things like that. And it wasn't going to be like, well, my sketches are older than his paintings. Someone else had beat me to the punch, so to speak. And so I said, I will never go down that road, only because I just feel like it's been done. And I don't like to follow others, you know. I never have, and I probably never will. But you know, finding a teacher, even I remember in school having a lot of students become clones of their teacher. Maybe it was due to their strong personality. Maybe it was the sensibility of that individual student to say, I really like this to the point where I want to be it. But for me, I never not only found that, I never wanted that. So you know, I always suggest find the beat of your own drummer, you know, like do what you want to do, and and see if it works. And if it doesn't by chance, then at least you tried. So. Like I said, I don't have, maybe this looks structured, maybe it doesn't look structured to anyone who's watching this. And as I said, I wouldn't suggest you follow it, but someone could try it if they're interested and see. I did, the last time I did a workshop at IAPS, I had a woman say, well, if you were, because I had juried some show, and she said, if you were a juror and I wanted to do exactly what you do, would you jury that into the show? It was a tough question because I'd like to just say no, because you're just following someone else's road. But instead, I just said, well, I'd have to base it on the quality of the art that I saw, but I wouldn't find it flattering, I said, because I wouldn't, you know. I don't think there's a lot of people who say that, you know, that, you know, imitation is the greatest form of flattery. I don't buy that. You know, personally speaking, I don't buy that. So I think you, as an artist, you know, you got to be you, and you are not going to appeal to everybody, but it should be real to you first. Because I mean, if you're chasing everybody else or trends, then you're sure to lose, I believe, you know. You might have some limited success here and there, but I think you're going to definitely lose. And you'll lose something in a portion of yourself, maybe, which is also not great. So I've been doing this for about an hour or so. And that means from start to finish, meaning I put in my underpainting, I put in the drawing, blah, blah, blah. And I'm building some tone. So I'm not sure. And if there was an audience here, I'd be able to sort of bounce questions back and forth. I have no problem talking and drawing, which you probably are getting tired of hearing as I speak, but I have no problem with that kind of mentality, because when you're teaching groups like I do, you know, it's just a constant thing where you're just talking and they're asking questions, and I have to communicate as I go, and I kind of like that aspect. A lot of people don't. I remember being at IAPS, and after the very first demo I ever did at IAPS, Dwayne Wakeham, which I'm sure a lot of you know, came to me and said, like, I don't know how you did that. You know, you were just talking and drawing. And I didn't quite get what he meant, but in retrospect now I do. That, you know, a lot of people don't like that aspect, to talk and draw. They need full concentration. I'm fully concentrated. I'm just babbling. So it came with the territory. I remember my wife saying that to me early on. I was very concerned about this demo I was doing at IAPS, and I said, I don't know how I'm going to do it. I've got to be up there, and there's going to be 50 people there, and they're going to be asking questions. She goes, you do that every day. What's the difference? And I had to think about what she was saying. And that was the case. I draw and I talk, you know, because I do believe art is very hands-on. And for me to communicate verbally while I'm doing something visually, it sometimes helps the students understand the process. And that's why I also was really thinking heavily about doing this without much preliminary things. I mean, yesterday it was Sunday, and I usually draw the figure for myself. Instead, I sat home and on just a sheet of newsprint, just did a quick study of a plum that we had out there. I was thinking I would do a plum or a couple of plums today. And instead I chose this because I just thought it was a little lighter in feel, and I wanted to get that approach. So that's why we have a tomato here. I always put these darks first. Again, I'm not sure how all of you were taught, or the limitations of my approach would be towards the approach you already have, but it's just an approach that I developed. I'm not sure it was ever an instructed approach. Like I said, being raised in a pretty rural part of Massachusetts, where my backyard was apple orchards and cows. I didn't have a lot of background. I do recall being sent to a couple of teachers over the years in Massachusetts that when I was very young, and some of them were, you know, they were nice people. It's just they were limited in their knowledge and approach to the arts. So I took what I could, I guess, in terms of, you know, what they gave me, but it wasn't really a sophisticated approach to the arts. I think I went for other motivations lots of times than just doing beautiful work. You know, I think I liked the work I did on my own rather than the work I did with a teacher, and that stayed pretty much the same thing. In high school, we had no real art instruction, and that carried over until college. And then I did have teachers that were very good at making me open my eyes to things. So that means, for instance, drawing and painting, and things like squinting your eyes and things that I had never heard before. So there were some good instructors along the way, but nobody in pastel. So that's why I took this approach to my work in pastel, which is more probably an older sort of approach to painting. And even that, I don't think I got that in college at the time. When I was in college, which was the 70s and late 70s, early 80s, you know, abstract expressionism was the rule of thumb. So even to get a traditional approach to painting in college, I found was kind of challenging. People were just approaching things totally different, and it didn't necessarily sit well with my mentality. So many times I just did what I did based on my youth, which was just alone in a basement painting. And I took care to sort of like build an underpainting, which for me has always been a good way for me to sort of reinforce the painting as I go. It allows me to see it as I paint. To see as I'm drawing, in a way, I'm seeing the relationships of both color and light, and then it allows me to make decisions. I mean, if I look at this, I don't know what narrative it would fit, you know, in what category it would fit, even in terms of drawing and painting. But like I said, it's just the way I think about painting, and it may be totally wrong to somebody. So by all means, don't follow what I'm doing. I bounce around. I don't like working the lights before the darks, generally speaking, because it reinforces. The paper's white. So I always think if the paper's white, my light's already there. Just little things that, you know, may or may not make a lot of sense to you. So, and is the drawing of this even accurate? Well, I would say not as accurate as I would like it, but again, in a short thing, and I'm trying to draw live completely, then I would say it's probably the best I can do in this short amount of time. And after this, I will teach another 3 hours. So again, I'm not a young man. And so all of these things take their toll. If I'm working on a painting upstairs, I'm sometimes painting all day on Sunday as much as possible and not drawing the figure, which sometimes is a little bit bothersome. I prefer to have one day where I don't have to think about the finality of a drawing or a painting. And so I take that time very seriously when I draw the figure from life. Using pastel, charcoal, things like that, I don't ever consider those paintings that I do because they are done over the course of a 3-hour session, which means after all the choosing of the pose for the day is done, I usually get maybe 3 20-minute poses to complete a drawing of the model, who is an elderly model. very experienced, but it's done in an environment of a bunch of friends of that model, you know, artist friends. And so the looseness of the session sometimes means that I don't even get a full hour of drawing time because there's too much conversation or too much distraction. So I like to think if I get it approximately an hour of drawing time on each drawing, but sometimes I have to knock it out and it's 20 minutes of drawing, and which is great, you know, if that can get done. And I'm happy with the result. And sometimes I am, and sometimes I'm not, but I take it all of those drawings as learning experiences, you know, sort of just it allows me to sometimes take chances, and sometimes you don't because you're in fear of not walking out with a good drawing. So you stay close to your comfort zone. And I think those sessions do allow me to kind of like not worry too much about the comfort zone because they're just quick drawings. But sometimes I'm very happy with the result, and that's a good thing. If I walk out and I didn't do anything in any one direction of what I consider a successful drawing, because as I said, there's limitations on the amount of pastel I'm putting. I'm not rubbing it. I'm just using a variety of papers to kind of graze over a charcoal drawing and sort of maybe tint it, you could say, or sometimes embellish it. I have rubbed some drawings. I have, you know, gone fully, the full surface is covered, but a lot of times it's just a minimal surface area is covered. And it's just a nice approach for me because it's so different than my formal paintings. And again, those are the only ones I truly would say are formal paintings, are the ones that are, the coverage is complete. And that's what's kind of happening here versus say there, or even here. This is just the beginnings. So it's more in a drawing stage until it becomes a painting stage. Even this area here, which is the highlighted shadow areas, they're not complete. They're just mapped with lots of color, but built color, meaning like I'm trying to get some variance in there, but that's kind of, I can wait till the end for that. I just really want to focus on the big areas and hopefully get something that some of the shades of color. I'm not trying to make a painting per se that encompasses thought and emotion and things like that, or narrative. I'm trying to create the illusion of this tomato on the page in front of me. And that kind of is all I consider these demos. I'm not, I think formal painting, for me anyway, it's there's something else going on there. And hopefully that's what I'm able to give the viewer. But these drawings that I do as demos, I'm just really showing you a technique that you may have some affinity for, that you go, oh, I would like to try that, or I would not like to try that based on what I just witnessed, you know. And that's, like I said, it's fine either way. Now, this being a smoother paper, just to go back to some technique, and a little bit less rough than Reeves, and that's really, if you felt Reeves, you'd never say it's rough. But the point I'm making is this having a little bit of a slicker surface, it doesn't have the ability for me to just knock in passages easily on top of built areas like this that are already flooded with pigment. And to a degree, they are flooded with pigment. So even my rubbing has to be a little bit delicate because I could almost rub off what I did. The other one thing about the technicalities of this paper and my technique and things like that is hard to soft. And I'm sort of jumping all over the place with the pigments that I'm using. And to some degree, I found that from a student standpoint of teaching, sometimes people come in and they have sets of pastel that would look like you robbed an art store. I find there can be some problems with that on papers like this, not on pastel mat and things like that. The one woman I teach, who I was, you know, so amazed with the amount of pigments she had. She also, when we had different drawings that she's working on, she would have some issues with soft over hard. And it's kind of, you have to think like that. In a way, you're then, you're rubbing a softer material over a really hard material. That can work if it's done in a balanced approach. It cannot be done easily on these papers, if you're just bouncing back and forth. So she was kind of thrown the first time she started to work on any kind of softer paper, because she was trying to embrace what I was doing. And I did make my explanations like, look, if you're using this paper, it's going to have limitations when you put different pigments of different qualities over one another. It would certainly do some odd things. It slips, it slides, it kind of doesn't have coverage. You can't grip the paper with the pastel. The pastel rejects it. A lot of little things like that can happen. So I'm a big proponent in my own formal work, so that I don't run into that problem of trying my best to stay and maintain myself through the painting with as limited a group of pastels as possible. Here, I'm just grabbing the color I see that I want, and I'm hoping the paper will adjust. If I run into problems, maybe that's a good lesson learned for both you and I. So that's how I'm approaching this demo, that I'm just grabbing what I do have. Some of these are Grumbachers, which are extinct. No one makes Grumbacher anymore, pastel wise. So I use them because they're a softer version of Rembrandt. And on this paper, like Somerset or Reeves or some of the other printmaking papers, which don't have a heavy grit, they have no grit. They're literally archival papers. I tend to think that you have to have some kind of protocol with your work. That means I'm going to start this way, and that means I'm building my darks, and then into those darks, I'm building my lights. And you have to sort of do that and maintain that throughout the painting until you're done and you've done a little rubbing. Now, when you rub any of these colors together, what will happen is they'll dull. And that may not be a good thing for everybody, but for me, I expect it, but it gives me back a little bit more surface of the paper. I often hear people saying they're reworking a panel or something that they had an old painting on. Well, you can't really do that on things like Reeves. You could lift it off in a small section to get back to the paper, but that's really a losing proposition. You have to kind of expect that the paper has limitations, unlike, when I was saying that woman brings a piece of pastel mat and she can do anything she wants to it and it still maintains itself. It's an amazing quality, you could say, but for me, it would drive me crazy. It doesn't allow me to blend and get transitional work. And I know there's masters of these papers that it is doable, whether they're using pastel pencil or their technique is allowing them to make those transitions. It's just not my way of working, so. And as I said, the very first demo I did at IAPS, I remember seeing two gentlemen that I had known their work but not known their faces. And I went on someone asked a question about, oh, do you use pastel pencils? And I went off on a tirade about the fact that I'd never used them. And the reason is someone, I think I got some small gift of them somewhere, and I grabbed them, and I think it got broken in a sharpener, and then I just sharpened it by hand. And I said, what a pain this is. And then I felt the color quality was not as good for me. And so, but at this demo at IAPS, I went off on a tirade, and I noticed the two guys were sitting side by side and use a lot of pastel pencil. And they both then proceeded to fold their arms and look as if they wanted to, speak out about it. But they were both very kind and nice about it. I didn't mean to insult anything or any medium particularly. It's all for you. It's what works for you. It's not what works for another person. Someone else can use this paper better than I. Someone else can use materials better than I. But from my perspectives, what can I do? That's how I always look at this. What can I do with the materials? And if I can't do it, then I don't use it, because I do experiment, with different things. But if I don't get an immediate result, I tend to go back to what works. It's just me. It doesn't have to be anybody else but me, So that's what I would say. Just kind of go back to what I said at the very beginning, which is find your own means to an end with pastel. It's a beautiful tactile medium. It just needs to be figured out in many cases, and to the way you want it to appear in the finality of your painting. Many times when I had articles, people asked me to write about pastel, or interviews about pastel and my journey through it. I spoke about it being, I don't know, the closest thing I felt to clay. Sounds strange, that clay would have anything to do with pastel. But I thought of it very simply, like I'm using my fingers, I'm pushing it around, then the sensitivity that I get from the pigments is through my finger. I don't use any tools. So I thought, what, this is very similar to just grabbing a bunch of clay and playing with it. And again, it might be silly for someone else to think of it that way. It's just the way I think of it. I do love the medium. It's tough to give up once you get hooked on it. It's not the medium that every gallerist loves. It's delicate, it's fragile. I just sold a painting to a gentleman in Belgium, and that gave me a lesson in art shipping, and also in the fragility of pastel and what I needed to do to protect it. I've sent my work all over the world. So I've had exhibitions in France, China, Spain, Russia, and sometimes I am the shipper, meaning I have to create the box for it, the crate for it, so to speak. And sometimes I build it. And with pastel, you have to be very cautious about things like that because of the nature of it. So I've become quite a master of packaging my art. But in this case, the gentleman was in Belgium, and I had to learn everything about art shipping, and that was quite different. They were taking care of the logistics of getting it across the world to the destination. And so anytime you're shipping artwork, and particularly pastel, you have to take some consideration to the nature of this, meaning that, the fact that it is water can destroy it or things like that. So I've been learning about that. I know there's some fixatives. Again, every time I've used fixatives, it's dulled my color, and I don't think in my way of using it I need it to be dulled any further, because I'm trying to use it in kind of a painterly way, but not in the same way that many of my peers use it, and they can bring out the most vibrant of shades and not sacrifice anything. For me, I have to be a little cautious of how I use my materials, and then I never found fixative to be a solution for my work. I don't know that that's the case now. I've read some articles on the PSA website. I've read some articles just online about different fixatives that are almost a varnish, where frame is, a coverage of, an acrylic or glass is not required. It's just, again, do I go out of my way to learn the technicalities of everything? Not so much. It's, you could say that's not a good thing, so please don't follow what I'm saying. Starting to build in some of these details. And as I build them, I start to see what's missing. Missing in what? Well, the color, the color transitions. It's all color transitions from this point forward until I get back to, say, that stem area or the background, to sort of like seal it off and sort of like make it pop out. There's still large areas here which are incomplete and need the help, but probably a lot more pigments. But I'm just going to start to push in some more pigments and then see where we're at. One thing I did notice, and I had kind of mentioned it briefly a few minutes ago, was this not being Reeves. What does that do to my pigments? Well, it does a lot. It's not allowing me, and I can feel this, and this is, I do love testing out new papers. So I said I don't test out things, but I do test out papers a lot, particularly for Sunday sessions of the model. But the difference of this and Reeves is, as I said, it has a slightly harder surface. It's still a printmaking paper. I believe it's still archival, and probably it's heavily made, if not entirely out of cotton. Is it buffered? Buffering is almost like a starch sitting on the surface of the paper to give it a bit stiffness. And in this case, I can feel that it's buffered. How much is it buffered? Well, I don't know how to, quantify that. Is it, this or that? How much is it buffered? But I can say that I can feel it. I can feel that it doesn't want to go into the fibers of the paper as much as, say, Reeves does. Now, these are my observations of the paper. Doesn't mean any of them are spoken in the language of a paper expert or even an artist in pastel, but these are my observations of it. So, good, bad, or otherwise, I'm trying to share with you how the paper feels different than the general paper that I would use. The reason I didn't use Reeves in the demo is because of the fact that it is soft, and I'm going to have to work a little more aggressive than I would in a formal painting, where I could take a little more time, be a little bit more delicate with my strokes. And that kind of allows me a little bit of the luxury of not damaging the paper. I see people, for instance, the woman I was mentioning in my class bringing in pastel mat. And I see people sometimes online mentioning, what they've done to the pastel mat or what they've done to other brands of paper that are gridded, and boy, it's residual and it's strong and it has all these properties that people love. But I'm not sure it would suit what I do, because I think it would require other approaches. I see people sometimes wearing or posting an image of them wearing a bandage, like a battle scar, but I tend to want to take care of my fingers because they're the only tool I use. Now, I'm an avid gardener. I do carpentry, sculpting, things like that, but I try to take as best care of my fingertips as I can, just for that reason, because I'm trying to maintain it as my tool. And if you sort of damage your fingers, then they're kind of a weaker tool in my mind. They're not quite as delicate. I'm looking for a vibrant yellow-green to sort of help push some of the values of this. It's kind of a color that I don't quickly see in my group here, but I'm going to see what I can do. Now, again, as I said, me using a variety of pigments, I want to be very cautious not to use something too alarmingly vibrant, so for me, I'm always a little cautious of that. I feel like this is a natural object. Yes, it's a bright fruit, but it has its delicacy of color too. And as you get closer now, traditionally something else that I would definitely do is work back to front as well, if possible. Now, I'm not doing the background first. I'm not doing a lot of the inside of the stem first, even though it's in front of the other portion of or behind the other portion of the tomato. I'm just doing it as I go, because I'm really more worried about building up the colors that I think will work. And I haven't, completely concluded that fact. Like, oh, I know this is the color I wanted. I don't know that for a fact yet. I'm still, as I go, I'm learning. I'm learning that this works and this doesn't. Again, not a traditional approach for a demo, where sometimes people are pre-planned, and as I explained, I didn't really want to do that. I would like people, as the takeaway, to say that working from life, as challenging as it can be for people, is a better means to an end. And I don't know if you've seen or didn't notate thus far that I didn't do a hell of a lot of rubbing, I mean, if you have a large area of passages of transition, then it might make sense to do quite a bit of rubbing, pending what the final outcome is to look like. For instance, if I was doing some large area of sky or something that was something that I didn't need to be finicky with, well, then I'm not going to use probably a maul stick, and I'm not also going to use I'm not going to sort of use anything but a broad stroke with maybe multiple fingers. This is a different approach when you're doing small details. The very first demo I ever did in pastel was, as I mentioned, National Arts Club. I did just a solitary peach, and that peach was huge. I mean, in relation to the real peach, it was probably a little bit larger. It was like that size, I mean, 12 to 15 inches. And so that allotted me the freedom to kind of move my hand around and sort of, not worry about finicky details, which was a good thing in the demo, because it was a very short demo. But you're not always looking for just a quick result. You're sometimes looking for beyond the quick result. Sometimes you're looking for more beautiful transition. I've had my times of doing demos where I felt like it was a complete and utter failure. I tried too much or something. And that's just the nature of being an artist, where you think you can accomplish things that maybe you should have understood or beyond the time limit that you had. So that's why I said earlier about me and time. I never put that into the equation of any painting I do. If it took me a month, it took me a month. If it took me 2 months, then that's what it took me. If it took me half a year, that's what it took me. I don't live off of my paintings. That's probably the takeaway from that statement. That means that as much as I would like to say I make money from my paintings occasionally, I don't have to live off of it. I survive through teaching. And that teaching is also not indicative of time. I don't care sometimes how long a project takes for my students. I want them to see the beauty in sort of exhausting time. And I don't think it's how quick it was done, it's how beautiful the finality of it is. So just, again, I'm sharing with you pretty much everything, since we have no live audience. And I probably overestimated what I should have done in regards to this detail, because I can feel how taxing it is to me doing it, and probably as well to you watching it. It's a lot. And that just means, to sort of go into these little tiny details, which I prefer to put on all my work. I don't stray away from the details. I think they're important, and to the final. I could have chosen, out of the thousands of tomatoes that I've grown recently, I could have chose ones that were free and clear of blemishes, and I did not want to do that. I wanted to do something that was very natural and in this case blemished. Another thing that I kind of tell my students about this technique is sometimes it's not a matter of rubbing. It's a matter of patting. Like I just want to get a little bit of softness in it. So instead of me rubbing out, rubbing, I mean, it is the thing that makes a lot of people dislike pastel is sometimes something being overly rubbed or overly soft. You know, the nature of chalk, you know, to say it's rubbed and it's soft and it's lost its kind of glow in a way. And so I understand that and I'm aware of that. Just I'm also trying to duplicate in many ways what's in front of me. And sometimes those transitions have to be a little bit more delicate rather than overt. And so in my method, I have to kind of work it this way. A little bit of rubbing is not going to hurt anything. And in this technique on this paper. Like I said, when I'm doing figure drawings on Sunday morning and I'm working on a toned piece of paper, colored paper many times, the color is part of the final. And so I don't ever have to think about, am I rubbing this? Am I not rubbing this? Sometimes I never rub those paintings almost exclusively because the color of the paper is giving me support, or the charcoal is giving me support for just a dusting of pastel, dragging the color over it. So those drawings are significantly different than this type of work. And as I said, you know, me just going into this completely without preparation. And that means the serious preparation I would normally do for any painting. I kind of, you know, have some issues with the drawing that is not perfect. But again, I'm just trying my best to bring in not only the real color, but the real textures and things like that are associated with this. And hopefully I get a reasonable facsimile to this, to the point where you go, oh, that technique does this, or this technique does that. It's not for the impatient or the faint of heart, you know, in terms of loving this as a technique. And, you know, frankly, as I mentioned, somebody watching a demo or liking my work even and saying, oh, you know, I listened to you, I bought all the paper. And I was like, you know, that's wonderful, but please be on it. Besides buying all the paper, be patient to learn about the paper, because it has its qualities. It's just, you know, do you love it? And if you don't, you know, there's other papers out there. I'm not a representative for any of these companies, and so I share my thoughts. Sometimes to the great avail of a manufacturer, because I've mentioned certain well-known brands, not in unflattering ways, just ways that don't include my use of it, because maybe the sticks are too small for my fingers to use. I love the color, but the sticks are a little small. I don't have small hands, so therefore I like the grab of the stick of pastel when it fits my hand well, you know. And that allows me to press down and sort of push and things like that. Again, I'm trying to flood the paper with pigment, so I need that push. Otherwise, I'd be rubbing the entire time, which would create, you know, much more dust. You can see in this technique, and I don't know exactly how it appears here, but I'm not creating a lot of dust. Years ago, I was seeing some girl in college, and she brought me to her father's apartment. He was a well-known package designer in New York City. He designed the Brute bottle. It was a cologne that was quite popular back in the day for men. And she brought me to his apartment. He lived above Tiffany's on Fifth Avenue, which spoke to his success in his profession. And I mean, it was the whole floor of one of the floors in that building. And it had a kind of a hallway that wrapped around the entirety of all the rooms. And then it went out and exited in those hallways out to bigger, grander rooms, dining rooms, and, sitting rooms. It was quite amazing, but he had loads of artwork on the walls, and he was an artist himself in terms of drawing and painting, besides just being a package designer. And at the base of all the pastels, I noticed a lot of dust and pigment that was sitting at the base. I mentioned it to the girl, and she was kind of clueless about it in terms of like why that was. But then a subway went by underneath the building, and then I got a good picture of why a lot of the pigment was sitting at the base of the frame. So, just that rumbling, that subtle rumbling, and it wasn't like, insane amounts of rumbling to knocking the paintings off the walls or anything to that fact. It was simply the constant, several times a day rumblings of the subway had taken and lifted off, some of the pigments, and they had sat at the base of the frame. So the reason I'm mentioning this is Reeves and some of these other printmaking papers do not create a lot of dust, because I'm trying to work, and that's part of the blending, these fibers of the paper are open enough that I can work it into it. The point is, you have to sort of find the appropriate softness on this paper that will be able to then sit on the paper after you've got this amount of pigment on it, because it has no real exceptional tooth that you would notice. And so that's why I keep mentioning or going back to that. You got to find what works with this. And it's not always. For instance, this is a Grumbacher, old Grumbacher. I'm going to see right now, because I don't know if it will sit, and it's sitting, Now, if I took a piece of Sennelier, I know it would absolutely sit, but it might also crumble. And in certain parts of the drawing, I don't want that to happen. I still want to be able to draw in my pigment. The other thing I'll do, even though this is an old piece that I may not be able to get again, I like that yellow. I'm going to just sort of be using it probably as we go for final marks. If I use it in this approach, I've flattened its edge. The beauty of that is I can broadcast it in delicate transitions. And so there's a couple of colors here I do want to adjust. And I'll just try to finish up the rest of it. What do we have here? It's 12. So now I'm kind of going on towards, let's see. Started at about 10:30, and it's like 12:05. So this is what I've done in that time. I always thought from a teaching standpoint that if you learn one thing from a teacher in the course of a workshop, in the course of a demo, in the course of a class, then that's enough. Then the rest of it is up to you to take that knowledge and bring it into your own wheelhouse, sort of make it your own. And I know sometimes people would want to take a class, and they think or a workshop, and they think in that one workshop, I will master that teacher's technique. And I just don't think that's a good philosophy in general, but I also think it's limiting in terms of what you're thinking of your own capabilities. Always think like you could take little bits of many bits of understanding and put them towards the greater good of your own work. Again, my philosophies of teaching. I've been teaching for 35 years, or 36 years this year. So that should give you some indication of my age. So I was 22 when I started teaching it. And I'm just talking about my private studio. I've been teaching for 36 years. Before that, I was teaching at SVA, and I often thought that about, teaching, what do you get from a teacher in a short burst of time? And took, I think, maybe one or two workshops, class workshops or whatever. They were workshops. They weren't full classes like the whole year, at the Art Students League and in New York City. And I thought, wow, this is, interesting. And some of the artists were wonderful artists. And I didn't feel they were wonderful teachers. Why do I say that? It's because they kind of painted and didn't talk. And sometimes I think it didn't allow you to get a window into what their approach to the art was. It was more just, I watch what they're doing and now I emulate that. And I thought the other problem I had with that was I saw a lot of teachers with armies of clones. And I found that a bit disturbing as a teacher myself. I think as a teacher, you can't help but be, looked at highly by your students, but it's your job as a teacher to also push those students further away from you, not closer to you. And that's kind of was a little bit of a problem I had with seeing how, a workshop or a classroom environment was set up. There's always bits and pieces that you take away from a teacher, and that's good. But I think if you start to follow their road, then that may not be so good. And I think then you limit that student's potential for what they could be. And that's as a teacher, what you should be doing is finding what your students can do, not what they can't do. And the other thing I'm doing is wiping these pastels off on my pants, unfortunately, but I'm just wiping them off constantly because I'm trying to get back to the purest form of that color instead of the tainted form of color after sort of wiggling it around on this surface, which it will pick up. Again, the paper's surface is dictating that. It doesn't grab, so it slides lots of times. When it slides, it's kind of picking up all the colors. Now, for me, that's a good thing because it's blending for me. It's not just picking it up and making the pigments, pollute the face of this color, but it's also, doing a fair amount of blending. So my fingers being not small are going to have difficulty to blend these little tiny transitions. So the stick has to do it for me. Again, that's, part of the nature of this is you kind of learning like what my sticks of pastel can do for me, what my fingers can do for me, if you like to use them. And sometimes people don't. Sometimes they think pastel is, a lot of toxic dust you're putting on your fingers. I will never wear gloves using this. I just think, again, I'm adding another separation between me and the medium, and I don't want that. For me, I want the connection as much as possible. If I have to clean my hands, if I have to die from the toxic residue, then I'll probably do that. I don't advise not working with gloves. I'm just saying I don't. And again, that's my badge of honor, I guess, that kind of sharing with you about pastel as a medium. Like I said, I don't raise a lot of dust. I also, though, advise my students, don't be sitting there and eating and drinking beverages while you're working as much as possible. I mean, I have a cup up here far away that I can reach over and get when I'm thirsty from over talking. But I've had some students who I teach a lot of elderly people, and they're sitting there eating a piece of cake with pastel all over their easel, and all their sticks and blowing their painting right on top of that piece of cake. And I always kind of order a cup of coffee, and I just say, you really shouldn't do that. But if you say something 3 times to someone and they don't listen, you move on. So the sticks themselves, as I said, besides the whole stick, how it comes to you, how do I use it, or how do I fashion the stick? Well, I usually snap it into shards that are about 1/2 inch, maybe a little more than 1/2 inch, sometimes a little less, whatever it breaks into if it falls on the ground. I do like it about 1/2 inch long because it allows me to grab it. I use it from one side, meaning like I bear down on one side to flatten an edge. It lets me broadcast the tones. It also still creates edges, so I can use the edge. If I'm doing some incredibly detailed subject matter that I need a finer point, and I've even taken a razor blade and fashioned it into like a pencil point. And that's just for some little micro detail that I want to sort of include, which, for someone else might just be, wow, what a colossal waste of material. And it is, but, anything for your painting. That's the way I look at that. I'm a believer that you have to sort of like let the painting dictate to you what it needs, not what you need for the painting. So if I need to sort of sacrifice material, I'll do that. I won't sort of like, sit there and worry too much about the fact that I use quite a bit of pigment that's sitting on the floor now and can't be used again. Now, once this is built, and it's starting to build now, finally, I can be a lot more, and I'm sure someone's going to say, if that's cavalier, then it's like watching grass grow. But it's my approach to cavalier is like making my marks on this type of painting. If you saw me draw on Sunday morning, you'd say, looks pretty cavalier to me, because I have to go so fast that I don't have time to really think. I just have time to draw and paint, or in this case, those Sunday morning sessions are simply drawing. But this is starting to, for me, feel like I'm starting to paint. Just going to tilt this down a little. And let's see what else. And what I hope to do towards the end is have enough time to swing the camera in a little better position to show you everything. But for now, we're just going to kind of keep rolling along with this, trying to get another grab on some of these pigments to see which ones are going to work best on some of these lighter areas. I haven't really approached a highlight per se yet. So I'm trying to figure that out as well. Again, using an old Grumbacher because they're severely soft. And I just want to see how this will read as a white or a highlight. And it doesn't read that strong because it's got a mild tint of yellow. So that's okay. Just trying to build a little bit of undertone. This will be rubbed, and then I'll hit it with a final kind of mark of white or two. Again, I keep wiping my finger on my pants. It cleans my finger as well enough that I'm not polluting every color that I touch from that point forward. So, sometimes a little bit of rubbing is a necessity to even rub your fingertips and get them off. I use my fingers as my blending tools, so I need to do that. And if possible, I would also say I try not to bounce back and forth into the shadow and the light too much. I don't want to do that only because I don't want to keep polluting the colors I'm using. So it is advisable to kind of work with your one palette of pigments as you go, because your fingers are part of it, the pastel stick is part of it, and sometimes that can have its own problems associated with, a little bit of a dull color mingling. This is, like I said, it's not a surface that can be abraded, unless you're rubbing it too hard. It can get very furred up, and that won't allow you to do the blending as much as you want to. If the pigments are rubbed over really hard surfaces meaning like a piece of panel or something like that, it can read very harsh, transitionally speaking. So what I tend to do is, if I'm using the Reeves, it's the most heavyweight of the Reeves, and it doesn't have any problems sitting on the surface of these colors, sitting on the surface of a panel, because the paper's thickness doesn't create any problems with that. If I'm using a thinner paper, this Somerset is noticeably thinner than is Reeves, at its heaviest weight anyway. Reeves makes several weights. Anyway, the bounce of a paper on a pad, well, that's what this is. It's mounted to a newsprint pad that's pretty full, and that allows me to have bounce, much like a canvas with versus a panel. A panel is hard. And this is not hard. This is quite soft. So I'm able to sort of like do whatever I want on this because it has a bit of bounce, and that bounce makes it just feel, I don't know, softer. I mean, the nature of the medium, pastel, it's soft. So I'm using that to my advantage. Now, this area where there was highlights, this I was pressing down, and I would do that in my own work as well. I would press down hard sometimes to really make a mark of texture. Again, in a demo, I'm trying to do it like pretty quickly to sort of make that impression of a mark. Let's see. I'm just going to go with something a little bit more purity. Again, if this is too harsh for your taste, I could pat it. That will take out a little texture. It depends. Do you want the texture? Do you not want the texture? Do you want a little bit more information in the openness of the light? I think I do. So I'm going to just add a little bit of a notation here. And, the beauty of pastel that I never really talked about today much was that I think it has is it forces you to blend and paint on your surface, almost like direct painting. No one's going to look at my work and say, oh, it's direct painting, but there is that element of, I don't have a palette that I'm mixing on. I'm just painting directly on this surface of my substrate. So I think in many ways it does have elements of direct painting. Again, I'd be the only person who probably agreed with that statement, but from my sensibilities, it does. So I'm going to try to instigate some highlights here. It might be a little too cold. That's the only problem when you're using white, is sometimes it reads so cold that you have to find a little bit of warmth in there. One thing I would also say about this as a quick demo is don't expect too much if time is part of the equation. Just allow yourself to learn as you go on this, meaning like, I know what I would like to do on this more. There's more transitional things, how background relates and plays a role in my colors. Would I consider this done right now? No, because there's still some color passages that are not right, or they're not completely, what do you want to call it, color corrected, or they're not quite exact as I would love them to be. That's okay, you know, to sort of have things in the painting that are not quite right. It's just my mentality about painting is maybe slightly different than a lot of other people's, in terms of how I want my paintings to finally resolve themselves. You know, in this very limited amount of work done, meaning like I'm only doing a tomato here. I'm not fulfilling the bulk tomatoes in a 2-hour span. I apologize. I'm not bent on the speed to fulfill in a demo. So that's again why I won't be called for too many demos in the future. But the point that I'm making is I like to indulge myself in these passages. I like to look at the details. I enjoy it. I like drawing things that are natural because of the details. And so when I get down to these edges, even the edges on this painting, they're important. If I'm painting something that is of great distance, for instance, like a landscape, or I'm painting a figure or multiple figures or things with lots of overlaps, there might be, this is a very short perspective, some areas that are going to be more transitional in terms of how the edges reveal themselves to one another. And I just don't think that's the case in a short perspective. Again, these are my thoughts on doing a still life. I'm approximately 2 feet away from the subject, and so therefore I don't see lots of softening of edges. And I know there's some optics involved in how people see things being turning in space, and they should really you know, soften an edge to make it turn further. I see it as a sharp edge. I'm putting it as a sharp edge. I'm not trying to fool the eye with optics. I'm just showing you what I see, and this is how I see it. At my age, I consider pretty good eyesight. I don't wear reading glasses, so I see all the details. If I'm this close, you know, if I'm further away, and then details start to get a little bit blurred. But you know, my sensibility is based on how I'm approaching this demo. It is based on what I see, and that's the stop and start of it. I'm not trying too much to embellish or stylize. Again, that isn't the nature of a demo that I would take on, you know. Last year at IAPS, the previous session of the convention, I did do a workshop on my veil works, and I did set up still lives that were based on the veil. I set objects behind the veil, had people paint that. Would I say it's a successful demo? No, not so much. Only because I think it's in a short session, and I believe that was over the course of a day. It's a lot to maybe look at a painting I did in the matter of a month or two and say, I want to do that in a matter of a few hours. And so I kind of have to, you know, always enter demonstrations and workshops with that thought, and share that thought with anyone who wants me to do something, because I don't want to ever disappoint the crowd, so to speak. But it may be inevitable if I'm trying to do something that replicates a painting of mine in a short span of a demo. So I need a little more time to digest what I'm doing, and the transitions, things like that. Hopefully when I get a little bit more on here, it'll start to make a little better sense. So it's going to allow in some more color. And this, you know, obviously it looks heavy and things like that. Those are the things that I didn't want to take place, but sometimes it is a matter of opening up the background to sort of reduce some of that. The other thing is, you know, pastel fingers, things like that, the scale of a finger, the scale of a stick of a pastel. It's not the point of a 000 brush, you know, so there has to be some sort of like understanding of detail, its levels of detail, unless you're using maybe a pastel pencil, you know, and it can be sharpened to a fine point. Since I don't use those, I'm always thinking of ways that I can get my detail to work, but also sort of not use too many tools. I don't like the idea of that with pastel. I'm not really a purist, so to speak, particularly in the way I use pastel, but I have my thoughts about it, what I should and should not do. So I'm literally just trying to build some complements here, brown and blues, to sort of put in a little bit of a gray and hope that it doesn't stray too far away from the grays in this tomato. I mean, stray away from the reds that are in the tomato, because sometimes what you can do is glaze with pastel. So sometimes after I'm done putting in what I see as a gray, I'll find that it's way too detached from the subject matter. So I go back and maybe glaze a little more color that I see. This may look like a brown shadow versus a gray shadow, but and it's just atmosphere, it's the background, but it's definitely got some hints of color in there. And I want to kind of keep that edge as pristine as possible. So I am kind of refining it. That's why I said sometimes I'll sharpen something to a pencil point, and in a way that's like almost like a charcoal pencil, except it has purer pigments than a charcoal pencil. Think of it, it has to be carved. So most pastels will crumble. A little bit of a stronger pastel, like a Rembrandt or something, can be carved pretty efficiently without just falling apart if I'm making a tiny little speck of a detail. And sometimes I get into those things. I like those little tiny specks of detail, oddly enough. So this happens to be a yellow white, but it's got a lot of color in it, some of which I want, some of which I don't. And since I didn't bring down my entire studio of pigments, I'm going to be scrambling probably to find something that softens that, softens the yellow in there. It might be this pink. So you do get a lot of reflective color off of objects. Even the shadow itself, loads of reflective color in there. I'll probably start to build a little into the shadow just to tie it up a little better. The other thing I thought about doing was a full refined underpainting, which I had done for one society in doing a demo. I thought, well, not only will it cut down on the timeline, but it's not really fun watching someone do a blue underpainting, though you can still see remnants of it here. That's all I would have put for the blue anyway. It's not a completely refined one. It's just a quick underpainting. So if I would do this for students, if I'm teaching pastel in a 3-hour class, I would do something like that to give them a quick understanding of where they should go. And then it's up to the student to take it, feel it, make sure that it's doing what you want it to do for your next transitions of color. And so this is, again, I will just say, my way of working, not for everybody, but can have some applications that you might be able to, I don't know, understand for your own work. I'm just going to get off a little of this since we're in a brighter area here. There's a lot of little scuffs from my hand. I'm not using the maul stick as much as I should. As an illustrator, I many times had to use photographs because I couldn't be flown to France to paint the president of France, the prime minister. So they gave me stock images of his face. And those stock images were usually bad photographs taken from multiple photos. And I had to form a composite to paint Francois Mitterrand's portrait. And that kind of is challenging unless you have a background in painting from life, or in drawing from life. You understand the realities and where to push and pull, or not to sort of allow the photograph to take complete control of the image. So I think, it's important to have different understandings that you blend in your approach to anything, particularly the arts, but particularly like, the differences of working from life or a photograph. I don't think it's, a cardinal sin to sort of work from a photograph. I think that there has to be limitations so that it doesn't pollute the image in a way. It doesn't overtake the image in a way. So if you're thinking about it, at least at the bottom line, you're thinking. And I've had many cases in my own work where I had to resort to a photograph, not only illustratively, just when I'm doing my own paintings. And it's not always something I relish. It's more something I'm kind of like trying to be extremely cautious that it doesn't take over my work. And sometimes it does. I mean, there's no way around it. I'm human, you're human. So we kind of we see what we see, and you get caught in the moment, and you start letting things happen in a painting because you're so caught in it. So that's understandable, but just you want to be cautious with it. I would hit this a little harder with some other brighter pigments in areas. Let's see what I'm not even sure how this looks, because frankly, I am, when you're painting, you need to step away, and I've yet to step away from this. And there's probably lots of little transitional information that I would like to change in this. I just, for a matter of time, I don't want to stop. I want to just keep going till it's somewhat done. And I'll soften some of the little details now with some little finicky marks, but again, can't really understand how it looks to the naked eye right now because of my proximity to it. Just notice down here, I didn't even put in some of these little transitions, so I'm just going to try to do that now. If I'm working on a painting upstairs, and that painting is generally one palette, I'm working at a time, meaning like I'm not bouncing around to green and red and all different shades of different colors at the same time. I'm kind of focused on different transitional pieces of the puzzle, so to speak. In my work, it's not a lot of big jumps from color to color to color. It's sort of like I'm working in palettes, and those palettes I stay within for multiple reasons. Number one, if I have color on my hand, then that color is not going to get areas adjacent to it polluted with the other color. I want to sort of keep my transitions as clean as possible. And if I'm working greens, and then there's probably very little reds in it, though there's tints, and those tints are like, that's the beauty of, in my mind, of painting a little bit slower, is I can look at my painting, I walk away, I go to sleep, I come back the next day, I look at what I've accomplished, and then I adjust it. And in a demo, there's very little time for adjustment. It's you're doing it live, and with that sort of quickness comes maybe a little bit more room for error, unless I've done the same tomato 50 times or something like that. So which like I said, I just tried this because I thought it would be a little bit lighter than the plums I had put out yesterday. Let's see what else color-wise. So I'm noticing some other colors in the background. I'm just going to try to see if I can adjust the background a little, open it up a little bit more. Find that color I had been using. Just going to tone this back a bit. Thing I would say that a photograph will not do is there's almost an aura of color that bounces off of an object sitting in space. Like you'll look at something close to this, and like I said, in a photograph, just won't reveal itself. It will look quite equalized. So the pigments will start to equalize. You might see a photograph and it's heavily saturated in reds, and you'll see around different areas where it was saturated in red. But I'm talking really close to the edges of areas that are like adjacent to the edge of the object. So I can see there's a lot more red. There's almost a vibration of color. Now that's, I'm talking in terms of, I don't know what, if they're optics or not. It's just, I'm talking in terms of what I see. And I do see there's a lot of red sort of emanating. So that's where glazing, you come back and you add a little glaze of color to warm up, for all intents and purposes, the gray that I'm just reading in this area. If I want to be quite finicky with this drawing, I can also just move all this stuff for a minute. I could flip it like so that my finger could do any little finicky touches like this and rub along the edge, and that will, allow the edge to be a little softer and less sort of sharpened. I don't want to see a blue bit of underpainting popping out. I want to just see the edges based on a larger area, which is the background. So, and that's kind of where it takes a little being finicky. I may have to cut in the edge after I flip it back, but this is just technical stuff that you may or may want to do with your drawing. If this whole thing was on a different colored paper, for instance, like I used a tint of blue or gray as paper, then I wouldn't have to do all this work. I could just open it up with some shades of white, perhaps. And you can see if you start being too cavalier with your stroke, you may get the wrong images or the wrong edges that you did not want on the finality of this. I'm just going to tint in a little more color. You can see there's some most pinker values up there. So you may want to sort of pop that in. I rarely question why. If I see it, I put it. And generally, I think that's a good way to approach color as is. You kind of say, I see this, and it doesn't make a bit of common sense. But common sense isn't about painting, It's kind of your approach to it is how you see it. And I think, again, that's sometimes shows people's individuality is their approach or their palettes that they see. So I'm just going to cut this in a little bit. It's just easier if I spin it around like so. Again. Is it important? Well, not for everyone. So it's important that I cut this in to a degree. Then I can look at it and, holistically and see if there's anything else I want to adjust. But I'm really just trying to build this outer edge, be sensitive to the brights that are there. I'm going to go and flip it all the way upside down. Sometimes I can see it better a little bit if I flip it up like so. Again, might only work for me, but I'm seeing some things just flipping it up. It also allows me to cut this edge in, which is important for me. I mean, it's kind of a crazy way to end a demo with me turning my painting upside down, but if it works, really, if it doesn't work, please don't do it. Allows me to read things a little bit better. Okay, and there's almost zero white on this. It's on a white piece of paper, but there might be a need for a little bit of spark down below. Sometimes along an edge like this, you'll see that little kick of brightness. And I may want to just really indulge in getting a little stronger white here. Something to make it pop. I think one thing I want to do is just correct this highlight a little bit more. One term, that maybe I've used throughout a little bit is about glazing. And though people may think that's a strange term for pastel, I do believe in it as a way and a means towards better color, where you can just graze it with a bit of warmth, or graze it with a bit of of pure color over the top translucently. And I do believe that is something that happens with pastel. And it's not something that I've heard a lot of people talk about in their work, but for me, I depend on it. I depend that this will be able to be glazed. I'm trying not to get too finicky with this at the end, but if time permits, I'm just going to soften a few transitions and see if I can just drag a little bit over. That one little area is a little bit finicky. If I was using a Reeves, I know exactly what to do. In this case, using the Somerset, I'm a little bit thrown off by the way it's grabbing my pastel, but trying to do what I can do to get that to soften in. And I'm just going to hit that with a little extra green. You can find that green. This kind of way of using pastel, which I was saying is a little bit different from the way I traditionally use it, meaning transitions. I work in those transitions, and those palettes can be similar to the point where if I have a whole handful of pastels, they're easy to discern which is which color-wise. And in this case, I've lost that ability because they're all looking pretty much the same down here, because I've been holding about 6 colors in my hand, all of different palettes. So again, for me, I would keep going into these details. So hopefully this kind of explains my methodology a bit. I'm not sure we would want to go further with this right now, but I just wanted to show you the way I approach pastels. And just to reiterate, I would say it's a very similar approach in a slower amount of time when I'm doing any of my paintings, whether it's landscape, still life or figurative works. I don't stray too far from the same methodology all the way through my work. So hope you enjoyed it. That's probably what I'm going to do for this demo. Thank you for attending.